The greatest power in the ancient world wasn't the Roman legions, it wasn't the Ptolemaic navy, it wasn't gold or territory, or even divine right. It was information. The ability to calculate, predict, and strategize faster and more accurately than your enemies. And Cleopatra had something that gave her an advantage so overwhelming, so technologically superior, that if it had survived just a few years longer, Rome would have fallen. Not to armies, not to navies, but to mathematics, to engineering, to what we can only describe as the world's first artificial intelligence. This is the story of the forbidden machine, Cleopatra's secret computational weapon, and the lost technology that could have defeated Rome before the empire ever existed. We need to establish something that challenges everything you think you know about the ancient world. The Library and Museum of Alexandria weren't just buildings full of scrolls. They were the technological heart of human civilization. The greatest minds from 3 continents worked there. Mathematicians who understood concepts that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe for 1,500 years. Engineers who built machines that seemed like magic. Astronomers who could predict celestial events with stunning accuracy. Physicians who performed surgeries using techniques that looked surprisingly modern. And all of this knowledge, all of these innovations, were available to one person, Cleopatra. She wasn't just the queen of Egypt, she was the patron and protector of the museum. She had unrestricted access to every text, every blueprint, every experimental prototype that existed in that institution. And unlike most rulers who viewed scholarship as a curiosity, Cleopatra herself was a trained intellectual. She spoke 9 languages. She'd studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. She understood what she was looking at when the scholars showed her work. And more importantly, she understood how to weaponize knowledge. The library contained texts that describe technologies we associate with much later periods. Hero of Alexandria, who lived just decades after Cleopatra, documented steam-powered devices, automated temple doors, and primitive robotics using pneumatics and hydraulics. But Hero wasn't inventing these technologies from scratch. He was documenting knowledge that already existed in the library's collections. Knowledge that came from Greek engineers, Egyptian architects, Babylonian mathematicians, and scholars from as far away as India and China. The museum was a repository of human technological achievement spanning centuries and continents. And buried in those collections were blueprints for machines that shouldn't have been possible. We know for certain that ancient engineers could build sophisticated mechanical computers. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a shipwreck off Greece, is proof.
This device, built around 100 BC, right during Cleopatra's era, is a bronze analog computer that could predict astronomical positions, eclipse dates, and calendar cycles decades in advance. It has over 30 interlocking gears, differential gearing that wasn't supposedly reinvented until the 1700s, and a level of precision manufacturing that archaeologists initially thought was impossible for ancient technology. When it was first X-rayed, researchers literally couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was too advanced, too sophisticated, too much like a modern mechanical computer to have existed 2,000 years ago. But here's the crucial question nobody wants to ask. If one such device existed and it was found by accident in a random shipwreck, how many others were built? How many are still undiscovered? And most importantly, what was the most advanced version ever created? Because the Antikythera mechanism, as sophisticated as it is basically a specialized calculator for astronomy. It does one thing brilliantly. But what if someone took that technology and scaled it up? What if they built a machine not just to predict planetary movements, but to calculate military strategy, analyze political scenarios, and model the outcomes of complex decisions? This is the forbidden machine. Not a myth, not magic, but a logical extension of technology we know existed. A massive analog computer, probably taking up an entire room in Cleopatra's palace, built from bronze and brass and carefully calibrated gears, capable of processing information and generating predictions in ways that would have seemed prophetic to anyone who didn't understand the mathematics behind it. And Cleopatra, with her access to the museum's scholars and Egypt's metalworking expertise, had the resources and the motivation to commission exactly such a device. Here's how it would have worked. The core mechanism would be similar to Antikythera, but vastly more complex. Instead of just tracking celestial bodies, it would track multiple variables simultaneously. Troop movements based on reported sightings, supply chain logistics based on shipping records, political alignments based on intelligence from her spy networks, weather patterns based on seasonal observations, economic data based on trade reports. All of this information would be encoded into the machine using different gear trains, each one representing a different variable, all interconnected so that changes in one factor automatically adjusted the calculations for related factors. The operators, likely the museum's top mathematicians, would input new data daily by adjusting specific gears or moving indicators. The machine would then calculate probable outcomes. If I move my fleet to this position, and Rome responds this way, and the weather is typical for this season, what are the odds of success?
If I offer this alliance to this regional power, and Rome counters with this diplomatic move, how does that affect my strategic position 6 months from now? The machine couldn't predict the future with certainty, but it could calculate probabilities across multiple scenarios far faster and more accurately than any human mind or group of advisors could manage. This gave Cleopatra an overwhelming advantage in strategic planning. She could test dozens of scenarios before committing to any action. She could identify weaknesses in Roman strategy that weren't obvious to human analysis. She could optimize her limited resources by calculating which moves would generate the greatest return. In modern terms, she was playing chess while her opponents were playing checkers. She was running simulations while Rome was relying on generals' intuition and traditional tactics. There's historical evidence that supports this hypothesis. Ancient sources consistently mention Cleopatra's seemingly supernatural ability to make the right strategic decisions. Her timing was always perfect. Her alliances were always optimized. Her military moves, even when she lost, were strategically sound and only failed due to factors she couldn't control. Roman commanders noted with frustration that she always seemed to know what they were planning, that she anticipated their moves, that she positioned her forces in ways that suggested she had intelligence they couldn't understand how she'd obtained. This wasn't just good spies. Spies give you information, but they don't give you the ability to process that information into actionable strategy. That requires calculation, analysis, the ability to model complex systems with multiple variables. And the forbidden machine would have given her exactly that capability. She could input intelligence from her spy networks, and the machine would calculate what that intelligence meant strategically, where Rome's vulnerabilities were, when to strike, when to negotiate, when to retreat. The machine would have also been invaluable for the economic warfare Cleopatra waged against Rome. She controlled Egypt's grain supply, which Rome desperately needed. The forbidden machine could calculate exactly how much pressure she could apply through grain restrictions before triggering a military response, how to maximize her economic leverage while minimizing the risk of invasion, when to offer economic incentives and when to withhold them from maximum political impact. This kind of complex economic modeling requires sophisticated mathematics that we don't usually associate with ancient civilizations, but the mathematical knowledge existed. The Babylonians had advanced economic mathematics. Greek scholars understood complex equations. The tools were there. Now, the astronomical component would have been crucial for military timing. Ancient warfare was heavily dependent on seasonal factors, celestial navigation for naval operations, and astrological beliefs that influenced when commanders would be willing to fight. The forbidden machine, using its Antikythera-like mechanisms, could calculate optimal dates for battles based on multiple factors: moon phases for night operations, tidal patterns for naval engagements, seasonal weather predictions, and even the astrological signs that Roman generals believed in. Cleopatra could choose battle dates that gave her forces every possible advantage, while her enemies were operating on superstition and rough seasonal knowledge. The technology to build such a machine definitely existed. Alexandria had the finest metalworkers in the ancient world. Bronze casting techniques were sophisticated enough to create precisely calibrated gears. The mathematical knowledge was there, preserved in the library's texts on Greek geometry, Babylonian algebra, and Egyptian surveying techniques. The astronomical data was there, accumulated over centuries of careful observation. The engineering expertise was there, proved by the massive construction projects Egypt had completed and the sophisticated hydraulic systems that controlled the Nile's floodwaters. All the components existed. It just required someone with the vision to combine them into a unified system, and Cleopatra had both the vision and the resources. But here's where the story turns dark. The machine had to be destroyed. Not by accident, not by fire, deliberately, by Cleopatra's own orders. Because as Actium approached and it became clear that Rome might actually win, she faced a horrifying choice. If the forbidden machine fell into Roman hands, if Octavian's engineers could reverse engineer it, if Rome gained that computational advantage, they would become unstoppable. They already had superior military resources. Give them superior information processing, and they'd conquer the known world in a generation. The machine was too powerful to be allowed to survive if there was any chance Rome would capture it. Ancient sources mention that in the final days before Alexandria fell, there were mysterious fires in parts of the palace complex separate from the main library, sections that were off-limits even to most palace staff, chambers that required special clearance to enter. The official story is that these were accidental fires during the chaos of the Roman invasion, but the pattern is too convenient, too targeted. These weren't random fires. This was systematic destruction of sensitive facilities. Cleopatra was sanitizing the palace, destroying anything that could give Rome a strategic advantage. And the forbidden machine, the crown jewel of her technological superiority, would have been the first thing she'd order destroyed. The scholars who operated the machine probably died with it. Can't leave witnesses who understand how it worked.
Can't risk anyone being captured and interrogated by Roman intelligence. There are accounts of scholars from the museum who disappeared during the final days of Cleopatra's reign. Officially, they fled, but more likely they were silenced, killed to protect the secret, because the knowledge of how to build such a machine was almost as dangerous as the machine itself. Cleopatra had to ensure that this technology died with her, that Rome would never know it had existed, that humanity would forget it was even possible. Octavian's forces did search the palace. Ancient sources mentioned they were looking for something specific, not just treasure, not just documents, something technical, something they'd heard rumors about. Roman engineers examined the ruins. They interrogated captured palace staff. They were hunting for something they knew existed but couldn't find, because it had already been destroyed, dismantled, the bronze melted down, the gears scattered, the plans burned. Nothing left but whispers and rumors about a mechanical oracle that could predict the future. The partial burning of the Library of Alexandria, which happened during this period, might not have been entirely accidental either. If you want to ensure that knowledge never resurfaces, you don't just destroy the machine, you destroy the technical documentation that would allow someone to rebuild it. The mathematical texts, the engineering treatises, the astronomical tables, everything that would enable future scholars to reconstruct what had been achieved. Cleopatra, or possibly Octavian after capturing the city, or both, had every reason to ensure this knowledge was erased from history. And it worked. The forbidden machine vanished so completely that modern historians don't even consider the possibility it existed. We found the Antikythera mechanism by accident, pulled from the seafloor, and it took decades to understand what it was. How many similar or more advanced devices existed but were successfully destroyed? How much ancient technology was deliberately erased because it was too dangerous, too powerful, too likely to upset the balance of power if it fell into the wrong hands? There are hints scattered through ancient texts, references to mechanical oracles, descriptions of bronze devices that could answer questions about the future, accounts of automated systems in temples and palaces that seem to operate with impossible precision. Usually, historians dismiss these as exaggerations or myths. But what if they weren't? What if these were accurate descriptions of real technology that simply didn't survive? The terrifying implication is that ancient civilizations might have achieved technological capabilities that we're only now rediscovering. Not in all areas, obviously. They didn't have electricity or digital computers or modern materials science. But in specific domains, particularly mechanical computation, hydraulic engineering, and mathematical modeling, they might have been far more advanced than we assume. The Antikythera mechanism proves this is possible. It exists. It's real. It's in museums. And if that level of sophistication existed for one application, why not others? Modern researchers who study the Antikythera mechanism estimate it would have taken decades to develop. It wasn't someone's first attempt at building a geared mechanism. It represents the culmination of a long technological tradition, which means there were earlier, simpler versions. There were prototypes. There was an entire field of ancient mechanical computation that we've almost completely lost. And Cleopatra, living at the peak of this technological development, with access to the world's greatest collection of technical knowledge, would have had access to the most advanced versions ever created. If the forbidden machine had survived another 5 years, if Cleopatra had won at Actium, if she'd maintained her power and continued developing this technology, where would it have led? Could ancient engineers have developed even more sophisticated devices? Could they have created mechanical computers capable of more complex calculations? Could the entire trajectory of technological development have been accelerated by centuries? We'll never know, because the knowledge was deliberately destroyed. But we can look at what survived by accident and extrapolate. The Antikythera mechanism suggests a level of technological capability that implies much more was possible. The architectural achievements of ancient Egypt, the lighthouse, the massive construction projects, all required sophisticated engineering and mathematical calculations.
the hydraulic systems, the astronomical observations, the medical knowledge preserved in papyri. Every field of ancient science and engineering was more advanced than popular history suggests, and Cleopatra was positioned at the center of all of it. The last pharaoh, the protector of the library, the patron of the museum, the one person in the ancient world who had both the intellectual capacity to understand cutting-edge technology and the political power to deploy it strategically. She was the ancient equivalent of a modern leader with access to artificial intelligence, supercomputers, and advanced analytics, operating against opponents who were still using abacuses and intuition. Rome won through brute force and superior resources, but intellectually, technologically, strategically, Cleopatra had the advantage. The forbidden machine was real. Maybe not exactly as I've described it, maybe the specifics were different, but some form of advanced computational device existed in Alexandria during her reign. The technology was there, the need was there, the resources were there. And the historical evidence of seemingly impossible strategic insight supports the hypothesis that she had access to something that gave her an analytical advantage that shouldn't have been possible with ancient technology. The final question is whether anything survived. Whether some fragment of the plans, some piece of the device, some scholar's notes documenting how it worked, somehow escaped the destruction. There are persistent rumors in archaeological circles about sealed chambers beneath Alexandria, about artifacts recovered and immediately classified by governments, about private collections containing mechanisms that don't make sense, about ancient bronze devices that get studied privately and never published because the implications are too controversial. What if, somewhere, in a sealed chamber or a forgotten collection or buried beneath the Mediterranean, a piece of the forbidden machine still exists? What if we could recover it and reverse engineer it? What would we learn about ancient technological capabilities? What knowledge was lost that we could rediscover? And what does it say about human civilization that we might have achieved computational technology 2,000 years ago, only to lose it so completely that we had to reinvent everything from scratch? The forbidden machine represents the ultimate what-if of ancient history. What if Cleopatra had won? What if the technology had survived? What if Alexandria, not Rome, had become the center of an empire powered by superior information processing and strategic calculation? We'd be living in a completely different world. The trajectory of technological development, the dominant cultures, the very shape of civilization, everything would be different. But Rome won. The machine was destroyed. The knowledge was lost. And humanity forgot that such things were possible until we started finding fragments like the Antikythera mechanism and realizing that ancient engineers were far more capable than we ever imagined. The forbidden machine is gone, but the questions it raises remain. What else did we lose? What other technologies existed and were deliberately destroyed because they were too dangerous? And what secrets are still buried beneath the ruins of Alexandria, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to go looking for them?